Ta-da. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our study. So I'm not quite sure where I have to look. We did a little switching around, so I'm.
Well, the camera's no different.
Ah, there we are. So, but I'm
the
trying
camera
to
hasn't moved.
I'm just making sure that we're
Oh.
actually functioning. So.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we only have one thing over here,
Right.
so it's
So here we go.
functioning there.
Welcome to our Thursday night study. We're glad that you're joining us. So.
Oh, it's not functioning there. We'll see.
But we're having a few technical difficulties that we're trying to sort out here. So, if you're on
It's just
board,
delayed by 20
there we
seconds.
go.
That's
Okay.
all.
All right.
It's been 20
We
seconds.
got it figured out. So sorry about that. So just a little bit of a confusion going on, but we made it work.
Trying another configuration.
So good. Good. Robin's feeling better. Yay.
Let me know if
she
you're
had a
glad you're here.
busy week. Hi, Miss Angie. Welcome. And Polly.
Marietta.
Thank you for joining us, Miss Polly. So glad you're here.
I'm so glad Robin's feeling better. Yay.
Yeah.
Yay.
So hopefully it's getting
Give
cooler.
you some hearts.
It's getting a little cooler in Ojai.
And some claps and some thank you, Jesuses.
So, yeah, we were down your way earlier in the week, Miss Polly, and not quite as far east as you are, but it was hot where we were. So it was definitely hot.
We were in
so.
La Jolla, so.
Well, and then we went inland to Santee.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
We went inland, yeah.
So it was
It
definitely
was
hot.
really hot there.
But anyway.
I was on Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday.
Yeah.
Super hot, for sure.
But we're glad you're all here. And we're going to pick up where we left off. Leviticus chapter 18 has proven to be a very meaty chapter. And so we're moving through it very slowly. But we stopped and we talked to a person, and they were saying how their pastor took a considerable amount of time to go through Genesis and goes through most of their studies very slowly. And we said, yeah, we took like 18 months to go through Genesis. And she goes, I think you have him beat. So anyway, so we're kind of doing the same thing here with Leviticus. We're just moving through it slowly and methodically because there is so much packed in these verses that we don't want to skip out on anything or just gloss over anything, because each and every aspect of this chapter is so important. And again, the overarching message in this and several of the chapters that we've been studying is that the Hebrew people are to be different in a positive, godly way. They're to be different from the nations that they came from, Egypt, and the nations that they are surrounded by, the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, all the ites that we read of in the Bible frequently, as constantly being at odds, violently so, with the Hebrew people. And part of that is because the Jewish nation refused, for the most part, at least initially, to go down these roads that these other peoples practice. Now, sadly, and we'll talk about it, they let their guard down, and those people were able to influence them. And you'll recall, we talked pretty extensively last week about the modern churches. Whoa, we're flashing all over the place.
Yeah.
The modern church needs to exercise that same amount of diligence and that same amount of striving to be holy, and that same amount of constantly assessing, are we letting the world creep in and decide or steer how we minister to others and how we worship and how we honor God? Or are we standing apart and truly doing what God asks us to do? Because even in the New Testament, we're called to be a people set apart. So, hello, Miss Catherine. Thanks
Howdy.
for joining us. Howdy, I guess we should say. Howdy.
Howdy.
Yeah.
The Texans
So-
logged on.
So we're going to pick up in chapter 18, starting in verse 24. And again, we've talked ad nauseum about the type of proper sexual relations that the Lord wants us to have. And we summarized it by saying that truly the only acceptable sexual relationship in God's eyes is one man, one woman in a marriage covenant.
Right.
Boom. End of story. That's the only sanctioned relationship that God honors.
Right. That's how he designed sex.
Right.
He designed sex for that purpose, for that circumstance.
Right.
One man, one woman, with a marriage in the context of a marriage covenant.
And I know that's exceedingly unpopular in modern culture.
It's not popular today, but it is what it is in Scripture.
Yeah, it's highly unpopular and considered archaic and a whole bunch of other things that are hateful, backward, blah 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 blah. Yeah. Again, as we started the lesson with, whose opinion are we going to serve and honor? God's opinion or humanity's opinion, which changes with the circumstances and the time and so on and so forth. So, having said that, let us pick up the narrative starting in chapter 18, verse 24. You ready, Doc?
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go.
I'm just putting the link on there for YouTube, our YouTube channel. I know I've given it out before, but just in case somebody missed last week or the week before. This is our third week in chapter 18.
Yeah,
so
you can pick
like in
up
case
on
you
it.
missed one, that's the link that takes you to our YouTube channel. So that's just one place you can watch the previous studies. I don't think they have them posted on the live.exclaim.org right now. For some reason, Leviticus isn't there.
I don't think
So
it's there.
I have to talk to Pastor Paul about that. I probably am supposed to send him some kind of link. But anyway, just in case somebody wanted to watch what we talked about last week, because we'll touch on it again a bit today, but obviously we went into more detail last week about those different situations for most of chapter 18. So tonight, chapter 24, or verse 24, chapter 18 still, verse 24, do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these things the nations which I am driving out from you have become defiled.
Again, this is referencing the previous verses that we studied, which had to do with sexual relationships that God did not sanction.
Right.
So he's just saying, do not, and he says defile
Right.
yourselves, and to defile something is to damage it, to ruin it, to cheapen it, to devalue it. Defile kind of fits all of those definitions. So clearly God is saying that anything other than one man, one woman in a marriage covenant relationship, that you're defiling yourself by participating in that kind of a relationship, a sexual relationship specifically. So Brian's on board. Hey Brian, thanks for joining us. A little late, but hey, better late than never.
Glad you're here.
Yep, glad you are here. So do not defile yourselves by any of these things that he previously spoke about. And then he calls out the other nations, because the other nations have defiled themselves with that. And again, in fact, those other nations not only practice them, but oftentimes practice them in their context of worshiping their gods. So religion, they incorporate it into their religion to give it, I don't know, an air of propriety or acceptability, I guess you could say. So, but God is saying, nope, that's not my way. That's not my desire. That is not what I designed, how I designed these things to be. To practice other than what I've designed is to defile it. So, verse 25.
For the land has become defiled, therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so the land has vomited out its inhabitants.
Rather harsh language, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So this is an interesting verse because it reflects back into to Genesis, and it reflects back. We were just down in Santee. We just had the opportunity to visit a creation museum down there in Santee that we hadn't been to for at least 15 years, because they said this new organization has owned it for
Is that how long they've owned it?
for 15 years. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's
Yeah, no, it's probably been 25 years since we
yeah.
were there.
Nonetheless,
Anyway, long time ago.
So we got to go through the exhibit again, and it was just the exhibits. It was just these powerful reminders that sin entered the world through Adam and Eve. They sinned, and that is why we're in the state that we're in. That is why the entire world was affected by sin. And again, that is a very unpopular view right now. And in fact, there are many so-called churches that are questioning that. They're actually saying, well, did God really mean that? Oh yeah, he meant it. He meant it. And
Right.
if your theology comes up with some other weird explanation as to how sin entered the world, you are defiling what God wrote in His Word, so to speak, and you're practicing something other than true Christianity. So, but in Genesis it tells us, my point is, in Genesis it tells us that the whole of creation was affected by Adam and Eve's sin. Verse 25 in Leviticus chapter 18 kind of reiterates the same thing. The land has become defiled. The land where these people are practicing it, their sin was so great that the territory, the actual land itself, was defiled, and you know, that can manifest in many ways: drought, poor harvest, constant warfare, poisoned waters. It can manifest in a huge number of ways. So we would submit to you, like people that are getting quite alarmed about climate change and stuff like that, they don't even see the root cause: sin.
Right.
Sin. So anyway.
Well, so one of the commentators I was talking about, I think, and I mentioned it last week too, is just that this idea here about, the land, the land becoming defiled because the people and their practices they're practicing things that are defiling themselves and are an abomination to God and are against God's will, because God is setting up this whole section of Leviticus on how to be holy. It sounds like, it's a lot of rules, but He knows what's best for us.
Absolutely.
He knows, He knew and knows, everything. And so we didn't even, know until more recently some of these scientific discoveries that we talked about neurochemical changes that happen when people have intimate relationships and
right.
sexual intercourse
yeah.
and things like that. I mean, we just now have learned these things in the last couple of decades, so these practices that were being, perpetrated by the Canaanites and the Egyptians and stuff, those practices have an effect on the human soul, and God knows that. So God's saying, don't do what you saw them do, or even if you did it back when you were in Egypt, no longer do that. You are my people, for I am the Lord your God. He's stating that over and over again. But when the people become defiled and then the land is affected, it means that it's affecting all of society, basically, too. It means that people say, well, I'm not hurting anyone if I do, X, Y, Z. It's in private. It's all by myself. But it changes you, it changes your soul, and that does have a ripple effect on all of your relationships and your role in society.
Yeah.
And it has an effect. You know, there are no such thing as sins that hurt no one else.
Right.
There really aren't. I mean, we think, oh no, that can't be true. You know, nobody knows I do this, so it should be like I'm not hurting anyone but myself. But that's not true. This is what Scripture is saying here.
Right.
Also, on another level, is that once the people are defiled and their souls are damaged, then the land, all of their society is affected, and they will be rejected
Mm-hmm.
by God, you know, and they will be rejected by, in the long run, you know, they'll be vomited out.
Right. And that's such a descriptive term. I mean, all of us get that the
Vomiting
land will
is-
vomit out its inhabitants.
Right.
Ironically, archaeology rather frequently confirms that, because how many times have you read, even in secular journals, even in popular journals like Scientific American, and when they were publishing National Geographic and just popular appeal semi-scientific publications, how many times have you read about civilizations that just seem to vanish? They just thriving, wham, gone. What does that remind you of? That, to me, when I read this passage, it reminds me of how, like, when you've eaten something bad and you feel terrible, and your body's reacting, and then you vomit it out, and it's gone, and you feel better.
Right. I like
But
how,
it's just gone.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's gone. It's out of you.
Yeah.
So this is what God is saying. Like, these people will be rejected and
Yeah.
ejected from the land.
Ejected. That's a great
They're
word.
going to be
Ejected.
ejected,
That's
you know,
great.
because God is going to remove them. So I like what Wiersbe says about this section we're covering, 24 through 30. He says, sexual perversions are like disease germs. Let's say we studied that in other sections of Leviticus about the diseases of the skin and things like that. They make a society and a nation sick. Then the land itself becomes sick and must vomit out its filthy people the way a human body vomits out poison, like Dan was just saying. So how tragic that people made in God's image should end up as vomit. I mean, imagine. This does not give God pleasure.
Absolutely
that
not.
any human being ends up as something that's poisonous and has to be vomited out. Please note that these were Gentile nations that were judged. Egypt and Canaan is what he's talking about here. Peoples with whom God had not made any covenants, but he still held them accountable for their filthy deeds against nature. So Romans 1:18 is the reference for that. So if God so dealt with Gentile nations to whom he'd never given his law, how much more will he hold accountable those who claim to know him and possess his word? So I like this last sentence. There are dire consequences to sexual sins, and the judgment is greatest where the light has been the brightest. So if you are a professing Christian, yet you choose to walk in your own way in this area of your sexual conduct, you will be held accountable, and that accountability is going to be greatest. That judgment will be greatest where the light has been the brightest. So, alas, the nation of Israel disobeyed God, defiled their land, and they were vomited out into captivity eventually.
Yes, they were.
So, very interesting.
So
This is all we're
powerful.
saying, and it's not like exactly one kind of sexual sin. I mean, if you weren't here for the last couple of weeks, there's many versions and situations that God said, don't do this, don't do that, don't commit this sexual act with this, a sexual act with this person or this person or this person. He's not isolating any one population, like homosexuality is in there as a type of a situation that is God does not want us to act on or to do, but it's not the only one. So,
Well, because like we said earlier, God's already given his standard. One man, one woman.
right.
Marriage covenant. Boom.
Right.
So anything else falls outside of that.
Right.
It's quite simple, actually. So I lost my train of thought, but it was so in just these few verses, what we see again, as always, we see the entire linkage through the Bible. We referenced Genesis, how sin got there and defiled the land, and then we see all throughout history how people disobeyed God, and there's consequences for it. There's literally consequences for it. We see that. So we see that linkage there. Let's move on to verse 26.
But as for you,
Change of
you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and you shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the stranger who resides among you.
Right. Just because you're not Hebrew born, so to speak, does not give you a free pass. Well, that applies to you guys, because you're Hebrews, you're descendants of Abraham.
Right. It's just for Orthodox Jews.
No. If you are residing in the land, so with God's people, then you need to adhere to these also for your own benefit.
That's exactly the way the NLT puts it. I like it. As they say, verse 26, you must obey all my decrees and regulations. You must not commit any of these detestable sins. This applies to both native-born Israelites and to the foreigners living among you.
There you go. Okay. Verse 27.
For the people of the land who were there before you did all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land will not vomit you out, should you defile it, as it has vomited out the nation which was there before you.
Okay, so we contained in this again is what we've just talked about at length, but also it's a promise. Now remember, they have not occupied the promised land yet.
Right.
But God is promising them, because these other nations have been so wicked and have defiled the land, I'm giving you this land.
Right.
And they're going to be pushed out. They're going to be vomited out. Just think of how the human body reacts to a noxious substance. It's a pretty violent act, and history will tells us that it was a violent moving out of these people. Oftentimes, it was very violent. Okay.
Right. I like how the NLT puts verse 28. So do not defile the land and give it a reason to vomit you out, as it will vomit out the people who live there now.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if those people are going to be cast aside from the land, God will do the same to you too. If we choose to go down the same path that they did. Okay. Again, it reiterates that the land was defiled, but it's also a promise. It's also looking forward to when they will occupy the promised land.
Right. God's saying, I am taking you there. So, yeah.
And also, I love how this points forward into time, and even though the land is defiled, it's not beyond redemption.
Right.
It's not beyond redemption that when God's people occupy that land will be redeemed, as long as they continue to do the ordinances and the things that God has commanded them. And that's true of us. That's true of us. There are way too many people out there that currently say, "Oh, I can't. God can't redeem me because of whatever, my past, my whatever, my blah blah blah," right? That's not what Scripture is telling us. Scripture is telling us that even though the land was defiled, even though our territory here is defiled, God can redeem it. God can redeem it. That's huge. That's huge to me. That's just enormous to me. So, moving on, verse 29.
Verse 29. For whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among their people.
I have a question. We'll get to that. But on the YouTube, are they seeing the split screen?
I don't know why they wouldn't be.
Oh, okay. Just curious.
Unless it must be like that far behind or something.
Oh, okay.
It's usually only a couple second delays.
Okay. So verse 29, for whoever does any of these things,
That's
whoever, there's not really a qualifier there. It's just whoever.
You're right. It's
So
not showing it there.
foreigners, Hebrews, whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among the people. So God's saying is that birthright does not make right. Okay, so just because you're born as a descendant of Abraham, if you choose to do what displeases God, you will be cut off in the same fashion. So we say this many times, but your grandma can't save you. Your praying auntie can't save you. Your pastor can't save you. Your brother who's a deacon in the church can't save you. You ultimately have to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, who can save you. So, and this sort of reiterates that point. So, and then going back to all of these sins that we've read about, these defiling sins, these sexual immorality. Again, we'll say it again just for clarity's sake. Anything other than one man, one woman marriage covenant, any of that is an abomination and a defilement, an abomination to God's way of thinking and a defilement to us. And commentator Rooker puts it this way: where there is incest or adultery, okay, and that covers all of those previous sins that we talked about, okay, we may truly say the family is murdered. The family is murdered. What murder is to the individual, that precisely are the crimes of this class, i.e. these people that choose to participate in what God does not ordain. It's murder. They're murdering their family. They're dragging their family down. And we know Jesus talked about generational sin and things of that nature quite frequently. So yeah, that's how serious this chapter, the admonitions in this chapter truly are. Verse 30.
So you are to keep your commitment to me, not to practice any of the abominable customs which have been practiced before you, so that you do not defile yourselves with them. I am the Lord your God.
Okay. And every time you see that, I am the Lord your God, I mean, it's a reminder who's giving them these. This is not Moses. Mm-hmm. This is not Aaron. This is not a group of elders deciding what's best for the culture. It's God himself saying that. You are to keep your commitment to me and not practice any of these abominable customs, which I know have been practiced before you, and just because they've been practiced before you does not make them acceptable to God's eyes.
It's like the old thing your parents used to say, well, just because so-and-so's doing it doesn't make it okay for you to do it.
Right. Manny's
right?
on board. Hey, Manny, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Just because your friends are doing it
right.
doesn't mean it's okay for you to do it. So
exactly.
I guess that's our parents did know something, because it's exactly what God is saying here.
Exactly.
Just because they did it before you and you're moving into their land doesn't mean it's okay for you.
It's interesting. It's interesting, though, because, it's like with that phrase, I am the Lord your God, it just, in my head, how many television shows have we seen and where the judge pronounces his or her verdict or sentence, I should say, and wham, hits that gavel, and that kind of, I don't know if they actually hit a gavel in real court.
Yes.
Do they?
Oh, well, I was in a hearing.
Were they? Did they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They do.
Yes, they still do.
But that gavel is like, so be it. So be it. And
it is done or something
yeah,
like that.
it is
so
done.
It is finished.
And God is saying the same. I am the Lord your God. I'm
Right.
telling you this. I have the authority to tell you this.
Right. Don't doubt me. Don't push it. Don't
Guzik,
push it.
yeah, Guzik summarizes some of this, what we've been reading this week and previously. He summarizes it this way. Our modern culture often refuses to see any aspect of sexual conduct as defiling.
Right.
The only measure is immediate pleasure, not right or wrong. But sexual sin does defile us. Sexual sin does defile us, and like Gay said, it does harm us. God's laws are given for our best, not an attempt to merely test us or boss us around.
Robin said, that's why sheep are so dumb. They all jump off the same cliff.
Pretty much.
They will follow each other, sometimes even over,
Yep, that is true.
over
That
a
is
cliff.
true.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So everyone does what, it's like the book of Judges. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, right? So
God called it out so many times.
that didn't just start in the book of Judges. That was also
Right.
happening all along. What did Eve do? Well, I think it's okay for me to take a bite, so from the very beginning.
Right.
That's why one of the strongest root sin is pride. That's why we say that, because it's doing what we think is right, irrespective of regardless of what God tells us is right.
So again, I think we've clearly defined what God's answer to all of the what abouts that people put out there, and God saying, you know what, this is what I know is best for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to live your best life, this is the way to do it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That may be upsetting to people. That may be countercultural. That may be viewed as by some people as hateful, as whatever. But it is what God says it is.
Right.
And so we would be remiss in not just simply telling you all and ourselves that this is God's standard.
Right.
This is what we have to adhere to.
Right. I mean, skipping this section or skipping these chapters, these verses, and or saying, well, it doesn't actually apply to us today. I mean, all that is, we are going to be held accountable to a higher level, being called as pastors and teachers of His Word. So, for a pastor or a teacher to change what it says here, or skip it, or say it doesn't apply to us today, they're going to be held accountable, for that. That God will deal with them later, because it is our duty, and all of us as believers to read the Word, know the Word, obey the Word, live it out to the best of the ability God gives us, and ask for forgiveness when we mess it up.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So that brings us to the end of chapter 18. But then now we move into chapter 19, and it's not as detailed a text on a particular aspect of sin, but it's a little bit broader brush, but it still is a very, very valuable chapter for us to read and to understand. And it reiterates what God said. And so we know that whenever God says something twice, or whenever He says anything, it's exceedingly important for us to understand it. If He says it twice, we really need to know this. If He says it more than once or more than twice, it's like, hey, know this. So here we go. Leviticus chapter 19.
Leviticus 19.
It's a long chapter, so we are definitely not going to get through it tonight, but we'll get as far as we can, okay? So,
right.
Which is usually not very far because we slow. Okay, so here we go.
So, verse 1, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Okay. So again, standard, if you will, standard opening. Okay. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. So we're approaching, or we're entering into a slightly different topic in the conversation. And he's telling, this is not just for your edification, Moses. You are to deliver this to the entire congregation. Again, the whole population of Hebrews, Jews that are here amongst us in the desert. You shall be holy. When people say, why? Why do we have to obey these rules? Why do all these rules? Moses, what are you doing to us? Rule after rule after rule. Why? God says, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Mm-hmm.
Boom. You are my chosen people. I'm holy. I expect you to be holy. Okay? This is not a foreign concept. This is not a foreign concept. We know that ambassadors to various countries, ambassadors may have their own opinions and their own ideas, but as long as they're in that role of ambassador, their job is to represent their home country,
Right.
the country that they are an ambassador for. Okay, so perhaps privately they disagree with a certain policy or something like that, but their job is to put the nation first.
If you've watched Madam Secretary.
Yeah, you would know that. Yeah.
Well, then, like, actually, there are many situations, but one of the recent episodes I was watching is, she was talking to, I think, like a parent of someone whose child, adult child, had been killed on a secret mission or something, and so she wasn't allowed to say certain things,
Right.
but she had to say what she could. The only thing she could say is what she could say as a representative of the United States government. She couldn't talk to this person as just a parent to parent,
Right.
because that was her role, And so, yeah, it's exactly that same sentiment, These are the things that have to be said representing the nation.
Exactly, and so we innately we know this. If you go to we go to many veterinary conferences, and the sales representatives there, they don't bash their own product. They tout and they show the best of their product, and the really good sales representatives are always aware that they're being watched, and they're always aware that if they're seen dancing on the table in a drunken stupor, that's not going to really reflect very good on the company that they are paid to represent. And so the good sales reps, now there are some bad ones out there that we've seen dancing on the tables and such.
Right.
Yeah, but in the same manner, if we are to be God's people, then there are certain things that we should just naturally avoid. Okay, we know in the New Testament that it tells us that all things are now lawful, but not all things are profitable, and this basically what God is saying here. Okay, is that you are to be holy, and you are to because I'm holy, and you represent me, and I want you to be holy because this is your best life.
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. The idea behind the word holy is separate. It's applied to God. It describes God's apartness. So again, that kind of squelches that idea that everything is God. God is the tree. God is the rock. God is the stream. Yeah, no. He made all those things. He understands all those things far, far more than we ever will. But at the end of the day, God is God, and the tree is the tree. Okay? You are you, and you're not God. Okay? It means that God is different than humanity and from all others. Different in his being, different in the greatness and majesty of his attributes. He has a righteousness unlike any other, a justice unlike any other, a purity unlike any other, and love and grace and mercy unlike any other. God is so beyond that. But I love that. This is beautiful. It's worth reading again. God is different from us and from anything else. His very being is indescribably different. His greatness and his majesty and his attributes are so far and above what we can even imagine. We can imagine some pretty awesome stuff, as that's not even comparable to what God is. Okay, he's so righteous that there's nothing that even approaches his righteousness. His justice is perfect. His justice is perfect. Our justice system often is very effective. It's one of the best in the world, but it doesn't always get it right.
It's still broken
God
in a lot of ways.
always gets it right.
Right.
He always gets it right. God is pure, unlike anything else. We look at a freshly fallen snowy hillside, and we say it's as pure as the driven snow, as the fallen snow, right? And it is. It's so beautiful, but that doesn't even approach what God is. I remember when I worked for the university that certain laboratories, certain labs had to have like highly purified water. Basically just H2O, nothing else, right? Even that does not approach the purity of God. Okay? And of course, his love, grace, and mercy are unlike any other. That's the standard that we are to ascribe to. So we already know that, wow, okay, we got a long way to go. But that's the standard, that God is holy, so we are to be holy. We are to aspire to that standard. We won't reach it, but we're to aspire to it. Verse 3.
Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbath. I am the Lord your God.
So now what we're entering into is sort of a reiteration of the Ten Commandments.
Right. These next verses, it's funny when you read through it, it doesn't really seem to be in order, but there is a way to connect them to, they are connected to, they all talk about something that's reflected in the Ten Commandments. So
yeah,
it is sort of like God is bringing that back into people's minds. And, it hasn't been that long since he gave them the Ten Commandments when this was being given to the Israelite people for the first time. But he's just, again, when God repeats something, what does that tell us?
Right.
It's very, very important to him.
Exactly.
So one of the other things that I heard about, he says, I am the Lord your God here. And so that's a phrase that through Leviticus 18 through 26, this section of Leviticus, that phrase, I am the Lord your God, is repeated 42 times. And in this chapter alone, it's repeated 16 times. So it's just very important, again, that God is saying, this is me speaking. This is my standard. You need to listen to this because I'm telling you this is what's best for you. I am your God. Oh, so Robin says, then how are we in his image?
Well, we're made in his image. Remember, Scripture tells us that Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, and they were perfect. They were perfect. Okay, but we are living in a fallen world.
Right. Sin entered the world in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And so we're still made in God's image, but the image has been basically like it's like a mirror, right. Now it's got cracks on it. It's like a cracked mirror now. The
right.
image of God is still in us, or we're all made in God's image, but we're broken, we're fallen, there's sin in the world, we have our sinful nature, there's mutations in DNA, there's all many different levels. The world is not what it was right after God created it, before Eve messed it up and Adam followed her and they disobeyed God.
So
does that make sense? Hopefully
yeah,
that
so
makes sense,
even
Robin. Being
made in his image isn't we're not clones of God. We're made in his likeness, and we're given many of the attributes that God has, to a lesser degree, of course, because we're created beings, but God is still the standard. So being in his image isn't an exact likeness. It isn't a clone.
Right.
Yeah.
But remember, this is why Satan is jealous of humankind.
Yeah.
Because angels are not made in God's image.
Even though they're ridiculously powerful
Right.
compared to
Right,
us.
but they're not made in God's
They're not
image
made
like
in God's image.
humankind. So that's part of why Satan is so
Yeah.
hell bent on
Literally.
tearing us away from God and intervening, coming in between our relationship with God.
So it's interesting that chapter 19, it starts with, everyone shall revere his mother and father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. So there's a tie-in, like Gay said. It's like these are part of the 10 Commandments, but they're like taken out of order, so to speak.
Right.
But there's a purpose. It's building towards a purpose. This whole chapter is building towards a purpose. And again, it's quite interesting that we've just discussed all of the sexual perversion and stuff like that. Many of the prohibitions and relational prohibitions affected the family.
Right.
Okay? And so God starts off with the family. I will remind you yet again, God is saying, revere your mother and your father, or honor your mother and your father, again, because they should be the nucleus of a healthy family.
Right.
And it's a reiteration of Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, one of the 10 Commandments. Honor your father and mother so that your days may be prolonged on the land which the Lord your God gives you. Very important part. The idea of like a healthy family is going to endure.
Right.
Okay?
So that you will not be defiled and vomited out. Okay. So your days will be prolonged on the land.
And then in that same verse 3, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. And again, that's also a reiteration of one of the commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, to keep it set apart. Okay? What's the linkage here? Well, there are many, but one of them is family, Sabbath. What is the purpose of the Sabbath? To think about God, to rest, definitely to rest, but to have that time to have a relationship with God.
Right, and Sabbath was honored as a family.
As a family.
So everyone in the family would not do any work. The husband would not leave if he worked outside of the home. The mother would not be, working away in the kitchen, and the kids wouldn't be, doing their chores. Everyone would be not working and spending time together as a family, thinking about the Lord, praising the Lord, honoring the Lord.
Right.
So the Sabbaths are about family time and not letting anything come between us and God.
Right.
Our activities, our thoughts.
Again, so can we see the linkage here?
Mm-hmm.
Family, honor father and mother, and Sabbath. At first, it's like those seem kind of random, but no, there's definitely a profound linkage between the two. Speaking of Sabbath, well, two things. The commentator Harrison, sorry about that, I'm having a hairball.
Yes, hairball. Harrison.
Reverencing parents is an act of piety towards God, since the parents are substitute for the Heavenly Father as far as their children are concerned. Mm-hmm. So you see that linkage there? The Sabbath is what? To honor God, right? To honor your parents is a microcosm of honoring God,
right?
Like in a healthy family. Okay, we understand.
Not all parents
we
are godly. We
understand that many of us in 21st century world did not come or do not have healthy family relations. We're aware of that. We're talking about this is the standard.
Right.
Okay. And then regarding the Sabbath, regarding the Sabbath, Guzik puts it this way: under the new covenant, no one is under obligation to observe a Sabbath day. Okay, and it lists the references there: Colossians 2, Galatians 4. Furthermore, in Galatians 4:10 tells us that Christians are not bound to observe days and months and seasons and years. Because remember, previously in our Exodus study, there were very specific feast dates and festival dates and seasonal feasts and such that the Jews had to observe. The rest we enter into as Christians is something to experience every day, not just one day a week, the rest of knowing we don't have to work to save ourselves, but our salvation is accomplished in Jesus. So we take a Sabbath. We, as Christians, I'm talking about the collective, we ought to take a Sabbath, a day to set apart to honor God, but but Jesus paved the way that we can experience rest, because we can literally be in his presence, so to speak, at any time we call upon his name. Okay, so
Right.
yeah.
Mhm.
So moving on, Colossians 2:6, real quickly.
16.
2:16. Therefore, no one is to act as your judge in regard to food and drink, or in respect to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath day, things which are only a shadow of what is to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Okay, so the Hebrew peoples did not have Jesus on the cross and resurrected. Therefore, this was all pointing towards Jesus. And then when he came, these days became less relevant compared to honoring Jesus. Galatians 4:9 and 10, which we just read. Now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how is it that you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles to which you want to be enslaved all over again? You meticulously observe days and months and seasons and years. I fear for you that perhaps I have labored over you in vain. This is Paul admonishing the Jews that were coming in and attempting to disrupt the budding Christian church by saying, oh, no, you have to observe the Sabbath, and you
Right.
have to observe this, and you have to observe that.
Right.
And Paul is saying, you know what? Jesus took care of all that. Jesus took care of all that. Observing these things doesn't make you holy. Placing your trust in Jesus and having the Holy Spirit dwell within you, that is what makes you holy. Verse 4. Wow, we made it to verse 4.
Good job. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves cast metal gods. I am the Lord your God.
And when I read that, cast metal gods, that any idol, God prohibits the construction or forming of any idol, but then he specifically throws in there cast metal gods. And I can just imagine even Aaron, when Aaron hears that, ouch, that just had to sting a little
Yeah,
bit.
right. The
That
golden
just-
calf
yeah.
that he helped everyone create.
Now, mind you, Aaron's forgiven. He's
Right.
definitely forgiven, okay? In fact, he's been made the high priest, right? So God has definitely forgiven him. But it's just a poignant, a powerful reminder that how easily we can go astray, how easily we can attempt to worship and honor God in a way that is pleasing and desirable to us. And God makes it very clear, do not make idols. Do not, and we've spoken about that extensively. And again, that's a reiteration of Exodus chapter 4, Exodus chapter 20, verse 4. Okay, and God is very, very explicit here. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water underneath the earth. Okay, pretty much covers all of creation, right? Verse 5, you shall not worship them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting the punishment of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing favor to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Okay, God considered idol making, idol worship, to be utterly detestable to him, and he admonishes the people in the strongest way possible: do not make idols. Do not make idols. Now the Jews, the modern Jews, the practicing Jews, the Orthodox Jews, still will be very, very careful in even how they design things, and what they hang in their house, and how their furniture is constructed, or things of that nature. Again, attempting to honor that. But God makes it very clear, don't make any idols.
Right.
Don't make any idols.
Right.
So let's see.
You're going to talk about the word idol next.
Yep, I am. So, in fact, that word idol, we're almost out of time, but we have time to cover this. That idol, the Hebrew word is Elil. Elil. The word comes from a root meaning, so I love this. That's why I included it in here. This kind of puts it in just rock solid
cool.
perspective,
Right.
right? The word comes from a root word meaning worthless, inadequate, or nothingness. It is frequently used in the Old Testament to refer to the little g gods of other groups of people. The Israelites did not consider them of any value. I love that. So when you think of idol, and it can be fancy and ornate and attractive, I guess you could say, from an artistic standpoint or whatever. But the fact that it is, quote unquote, an idol, the root word, worthless. And I love how this is defined. Inadequate, or nothingness. You are wasting your time dealing with idols. You are wasting your time. So this is probably a good spot to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we're going to go into a new topic, or a new subtopic, actually. So so this will be an excellent place to stop. Mm-hmm. So wow, we covered a lot of ground.
Right.
So thank you one and all for joining us. Let's see.
It's the end of August, so happy September.
Yeah, Labor Day's coming up this weekend, I guess.
This weekend is Labor Day weekend. That's
unofficial, not that we mark seasons and times. No, it's the unofficial end of summer, and so I was reading somewhere that Starbucks is already going to start offering their pumpkin lattes. So I think starting this weekend.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So.
Wow. Great.
Oh my goodness. Pumpkin lattes, it must be fall, right? So, okay. So, but thank you one and all for joining us. Truly appreciate you taking time out of your busy week to follow along in our studies. And
thanks you guys for joining us.
And we will see
Look
you
forward to
right
seeing
here.
You back here next week.
Next week, we'll continue on in Leviticus chapter 19. Blessings to you all.
The saga continues.
Yep, the saga continues. Good night.
Good night. Blessings.
Blessings.
Bye-bye.